to talk a little bit about the difference between sadness and depression. They can feel quite similar, but there is a difference. Sadness is usually something that comes over you and it's coinciding with an event. You might have had a death in the family, or you may have had something come to you that has been a shock, and you're first struck with, just sadness that this terrible thing has happened. It could be related to family. It could be related to personal possessions. There is a certain amount of sadness that can come over you. Maybe you're an adult and you have, a stuffed animal or something that you've had since you were a child. So you have an emotional attachment to that stuffed bunny, say. And for some reason it gets destroyed. And you feel an intense sadness comes over you. This is most commonly experienced in the death of a loved one, or in divorce, or the loss of a lifelong career. There's a lot of things that can trigger sadness in your life. Sadness hurts. It's an emotional response to a painful event. But it is normal and it is natural for you to feel sadness. Sadness tends to fade with time. It becomes easier to bear the loss that you've had or the traumatic experience that you've had. So it tends to fade. It's not something that generally in a healthy mental state and a healthy emotional state will linger for, many, many years. Depression, on the other hand, is usually not connected with an event. It could be connected to an event, but generally it comes over you and you're more feeling sad. But if someone says, okay, well, why are you feeling sad? Depression doesn't jump out at you and say, oh, you're depressed because of this. It usually doesn't have a reason. And a lot of times you may not be understood, and people may not sympathize with you when you're feeling depression, because it's a pain that can't be seen. The first time that I experienced depression, I was probably about 10 years old. It was close to evening and my room was somewhat dark. Not real dark, but the shade of evening had come over. And I was standing just staring in space, and I had this sensation of everything just moving back from me. And I kind of got tunnel vision. And I'm standing there as a 10-year-old child, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? I feel really, really bad. And I didn't have the word depression come to me or anything, and it was many years later that I realized that when these feelings of pain, despondency, emotional hurt came over me, that it was actually something called depression. Now, depression is no longer considered a mental illness. I think it's actually a very normal emotional response. But when depression becomes a problem is when it's chronic and it just comes over you, and there's just this sense of despondency and hopelessness that doesn't go away. And it can affect you in so many different ways. You can lose your appetite, you can lose your motivation, you can lose your desire to achieve. Sometimes you just don't want to get out of the bed, or you don't want to leave the house. I have at times been in such a despondency, a state of depression and melancholy, that I couldn't laugh at a joke. I didn't even want to experience relief, because It's just like, what's the point? What's the point in trying? I have spent many years overcoming my chronic depression that began when I was just a child. And I think overall, I have learned that allowing myself to feel that despondency, to feel that hopelessness for a short period of time is actually somewhat therapeutic. I try to connect an event or something that could be causing me to be depressed. It could even be triggered by poor diet, or maybe it's in the winter and you're not getting any sun. But depression is a chronic thing. Now, if you have, it can be treated. You should go to the doctor. You should have a support system that people you can talk to, people that understand where you may be coming from. It becomes a problem when you are experiencing chronic depression. And say, for instance, nobody is around to help you. Maybe you are a loner, maybe you are alone. This happens a lot of times to widows who've lost their husband and their children are far away from them. You should still seek out the company of other people. And this can be difficult and I do understand it, because I'm an introvert, and the last thing that I want to do when I am severely depressed is hang out with anybody. It's something I just want to recede in a corner and experience alone. In my experience, there's been very little. I've had very little points of sympathy, or I've not been entertained in my depression. I've had to learn to conquer it alone. But when you have this condition, and then you get struck with something that also brings on a sense of sadness, it can literally be explicitly painful. The sense of despair, the sense of hopelessness, and can come over you till it's just very, very difficult to bear. Now, I personally have never been suicidal. I'm a lover of life, and I'm a fighter, and it's just not something that I seriously entertain. I have had suicidal thoughts, especially, in my younger years, in my teenage years. But I just was not really ever tempted to commit suicide. But this is something that can happen even with chronic depression. And many times parents don't even realize that this is going on. So as you're raising your children, they should be encouraged to share their emotions. I wish I had learned this earlier in my life. But many times parents don't take seriously the emotional hurts of their children, and they should always be validated. From the time they're infants, their pain, their emotional pain should be validated, and this will not spoil a child. It's a parent's job to understand when a child is hurting. And it increases as they get closer to being teenagers, and even after they're adults. As adults, it's very difficult to know that your child is going through something that's painful, and they may be depressed and may be hurting because, if they're out on their own and they're independent, you may not be able to comfort them in the way that you can as a small child. So take advantage of that when they're little and they're at home, and you can actually deeply validate them and make them feel better. And this probably will allow them to understand what's going on with them when they get older and they're adults and you're farther away from them and can't bring them the comfort that you would like to. A lot of times people don't want to admit it. They want to play strong, and they will ignore their own emotional pain, or they may try to hide it, refuse to discuss it. And there was a point in my life where I was incredibly not only depressed, but I was going through an incredible, horrible amount of sadness. And I just decided I just wasn't going to do it anymore. I wasn't going to acknowledge it. I wasn't going to allow myself to feel it. I was going to buck up and be strong. Now, this may work in the the realm of being brave, but if you don't allow yourself to feel the emotional pain that you're going through, it will affect your physical body. So if you are in a state of depression or you're in a state of sadness and you're refusing to acknowledge that you're hurting, it is going to have detrimental effects on your physical body. You could get ulcers in your stomach. You could get chronic fatigue syndrome. You could lean more towards a stroke or a heart attack. My body's favorite defense against depression and sadness is hives. This also goes along with anxiety, but for years I have been plagued with hives that break out as a rash. And at one point, and I've told this in a few of my other videos, for 3 entire months I had hives from the top of my head to the soles of my feet, and it was itchy and painful and terrible. And I did not begin to get, and I was on medication that just absolutely knocked me out to help me to cope with the itching and, the pain. And I did not start recovering from this until I realized that it was because I was bucking the whole sorrow thing. And when I faced it and I said, you know what, I'm not allowing myself to express this pain and to release this pain. And I allowed myself to start crying, and whenever it would come over me, I would allow myself to feel my sorrow. And gradually, over time, I started getting better with my hives. Hives hit me if I'm having, a lot of anxiety, sadness, depression, stress. There's just a lot of things that brings hives on me. But I have learned that you have to release this emotional pain. You have to allow yourself to feel it. And being in denial is not a healthy thing. And the worst thing that you can do if you have a loved one that's experiencing these things is to, fail to validate them. And, we should all seek to be that person that doesn't cause sadness. I have, I think, in times been a person, because I'm very straightforward and, I tend to not have the ability to have empathy as I should at times. I haven't been shown very much empathy in my life, and I'm kind of dressed for it here today. I've got a black shirt on. I'm not intending to be goth or anything in this very serious conversation. But I have not been shown a lot of sympathy or care, and I come from a family that expects you to buck up and just be strong. And so I did not learn down through all of my years because I wasn't given sympathy. I did not have people express or feel empathy towards my needs. I had a very difficult time starting to feel these things. And I'm sure that there was people that thought in times that maybe I was narcissistic because I lacked empathy. And it was really because I did not know empathy. And there was a lot of times that I rejected love because I didn't feel like I knew love. So as you try to educate yourself on these things, start to realize those around you that may be susceptible to depression or sadness. And especially if you see someone, they lose a loved one, or they go through a divorce, or they have their house burned down, or, it could be any number of things. But especially those that have not been through a traumatic experience, giving a person with depression, chronic depression, comfort and validation is not going to make them worse. It's not enabling. A lot of times I think, especially in the different eras of my life, the situations I was in, any kind of validation at depression was seen as, weakness. They didn't want to enable you. They didn't want to increase you. Feeling sorry for yourself was a bad thing. Don't feel sorry for yourself. Back, as I've said many times, I'm 64 years old. I was born in 1960. And back in that time, they had just been through the war. And it was get over it, get up, and get on with life. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, which just makes the entire situation worse, because then you not only have a chronic condition that you're dealing with, but you also feel unloved, rejected, abandoned, and you start to feel like you're defective in some way. So on the other side of it, we need to realize and recognize this in other people, and we need to start understanding why they're doing what they're doing and where they're coming from. And especially if you know their past to be particularly difficult, they've had a difficult childhood, they've been in the military, they were bullied in school, and it's not a bad thing to validate and comfort a person in their sorrows or in their despair. And we have been led to believe that if you do validate a person in their depression or their sadness or their grief, that you're enabling it and just making it worse. It's kind of like if you just don't pay attention to it, it'll go away. It doesn't go away. From an infant crying in the corner because he fell down and scratched his knees, and the parents are saying, "You're a big boy, you're going to be just fine," that will callous over, and it will get harsh, it will get harder, and it will become something that's huge in their adulthood. So this was just a little talk on sadness and depression, and a little bit of education that will maybe allow you to be more aware of these conditions and these situations in yourself and in other people. And while this wasn't a particularly cheerful conversation, I hope that it was helpful, and realize that tears are a good thing. If you are compelled to cry, even if you're a man, tears are okay. Tears are also very natural, very healing, and they don't take away your ability to be an adult. They don't take away any value that you are as a person, as a man, as a leader. Tears are a good thing, and the strongest people are capable of crying. So I am going to say goodbye for now. Maybe tomorrow will be a little bit more cheerful conversation, but I felt like that this was really important to answer this question. Number one, what is the difference between sadness and depression? And realizing that there are coping skills. There's ways of dealing with it that will make your life better. So until tomorrow, I'm going to say goodbye for now.